The sound of wood straining echoes off the stone walls. There is no screaming, just the heavy breathing of the man turning the crank and the disturbing silence of the man with his leg trapped in the device. The setting is Rome. The torturer is Epictetus, freed from Nero, imperial secretary, one of the most powerful men in the civilized world. He seethes with rage. Sweat runs down his face, stained with frustration. And the slave before him is a child, skinny, silent. Epictetus wants despair. He wants the slave to beg, crawl, and recognize through tears his total and indisputable inferiority. This is how power works in Rome. You demonstrate who is in charge by your ability to make others scream. This is how senators intimidate. This is how generals discipline legions. That's how the world works. But the slight boy watches his own ankle being crushed with the clinical coolness of a doctor examining a patient. Your face is a marble wall. Your eyes don't run away. The crank turns once more, and the boy's voice comes out calmly, without a single tremor. You will break it. Epictetus, driven mad by the absurd insolence of that serenity, pulls the lever with all his weight. The physical pain hits that blind spot that makes veteran soldiers lose their senses. But the boy's posture remains rigid. A sharp crack cuts the air. The bone gives way. And then, in the sepulchral silence that follows the fracture, the same voice, monotonous, unwavering, resounds once again. Didn't I warn you that you would break it? At that moment, the most powerful man in the room felt the bitter taste of terror. Epictetus realized that, even if he destroyed that slave into 1,000 pieces, he would never be his owner. Because the owner of a man is not the one who controls his body, and that mind was completely out of his reach. This boy grew up to become the philosopher most read by the emperors of Rome, and he never forgot what he learned at that moment. That the only real power is the one that no one can take away from you. To understand the magnitude of this moment, it is necessary to look into the dark abyss of the 1st century after Christ. Epictetus was born around the year 50 AD in Hierapolis, a Greek city in Phrygia, now Turkey. There was nothing grand about its origin. He was property, an object with a name. His mother was a slave, and that meant he would be too, with no choice, no recourse, no horizon. Its original name has been erased by history. Epictetus just means acquired. Rome at that time was a machine of brutal contrasts. The same empire that produced philosophy, architecture, and law supported a system where human beings were bought and sold like tools. Senators were poisoned at banquets. Generals were forced to slit their own wrists because of rumors. Paranoia ruled the streets, and slaves were crucified by the thousands simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Nero, the emperor whom Epictetus served, was one of the most sadistic rulers recorded in history. He had his own mother killed. He used terror as an instrument of government. He burned poets. And inside the house of one of his trusted men, a slave boy watched all this in silence, learning the anatomy of corrupted power. Epictetus knew the gears of this machine very well. He himself had been a slave before purchasing his freedom and rising to power. His tragedy is the tragedy of the man who rises through strength and comes to believe that strength is everything. He projected his own insecurities onto Epictetus, trying to break the weakness that existed within himself in the slave. But Epictetus grew up watching the Roman elite closely, and he realized, very early on, a disturbing truth. True slavery does not need iron chains. The most powerful men in Rome were slaves to their riches, to public opinion, to the fear of death, to a child's fever, to gossip in the Senate. Men who could have entire armies beheaded went into absolute panic over a word spoken in a low voice in the wrong place. Epictetus, sleeping on the cold floor penniless, built an impregnable fortress inside his own skull. He decided that if his body belonged to Caesar, his mind belonged only to himself. and that no emperor, no decree, and no pain could enter this fortress without his permission. The central conflict of his life was neither a pitched battle nor a political conspiracy. It was something quieter and more devastating. The attempt of an entire system to convince him that he was not free, and the calm, unwavering daily refusal to accept that lie. The broken ankle wasn't the end, it was the consecration. Epictetus would limp for the rest of his life. The leg never healed properly. But what Epictetus tried to use as a permanent reminder of weakness, Epictetus turned into the core of all his thought. Because Epictetus, contrary to what one might expect, noticed something in the boy. A quality he couldn't bend, and instead of destroying him, he allowed Epictetus to study with Musonius Rufus, the greatest Stoic teacher in Rome at the time. Here begins the second confrontation, more subtle and deeper. Epictetus sat among free men and learned philosophy with a body that still belonged to another man. He heard about inner freedom while wearing outer chains, and instead of letting this contradiction fester within him as resentment, he made it the heart of all his teaching. When he was freed, he began teaching on the streets of Rome. Young nobles, hardened soldiers, and influential politicians sat at the feet of that limping ex-slave to understand where that strength came from. He looked them in the eyes and destroyed their illusions of grandeur. You wear expensive togas and command legions, but you cry like children when a woman abandons you. In the year 89 after Christ, Emperor Domitian, consumed by paranoia, expelled all philosophers from Rome. Rich men cried over confiscated property. Politicians begged on their knees. Epictetus packed his few things, picked up his wooden crutch, and walked towards the city gates. Without looking back, no regrets. He settled in Nicopolis, Greece, and there, in absolute exile, he built his greatest victory. The emperor thought he had silenced him. What happened was the opposite. His school became the most rigorous mental training center in the ancient world. The men who would soon rule Rome crossed the Mediterranean just to hear this limping man speak. Domitian ruled Rome with terror. Epictetus ruled the minds of the strongest men in Roman history, from an empty room in Greece. When you lose your job at 40, after 15 years with a company, after turning down other offers out of loyalty, after putting the organization's name above your own, and the manager calls you into a small room on a Friday afternoon and tells you the position has been eliminated, there is one question that will haunt you that night. Why did I do everything right and yet this happened? Or maybe it's another version of the same pain, when your company fails after 10 years of sweat, sleepless nights, and family sacrifice. When you're 45 years old and you discover that the person you've shared your life with for the last decade has decided to leave. When cold sweat runs down your back and you feel like the floor of the world has disappeared from beneath your feet, the first reaction is despair. You want to scream. You want to blame the market, the ex-partner, the cheating boss, the government, bad luck. You feel like your leg is being placed in the press. But listen to the voice of Epictetus crossing the millennia. He didn't say the pain wasn't real. A broken leg hurts. That's an irrefutable physical fact. What he taught was a surgical distinction that changes everything when you really understand it. There is what depends on you, and there is what doesn't. And most of the things you most fear losing are not up to you. The job didn't depend on you. It depended on another man's decision, on the market, on the company's internal politics. The financial market is not under your control. Another person's heart is not under your control. Your boss's integrity is not under your control. Let them break. Let them take it. You can go live in a smaller apartment. You may have to start over from scratch. You can spend nights staring at the ceiling. But if you keep your will intact, if you get up in the morning with dignity, refusing to crawl in the mud of self-pity, you are more powerful than anyone who put you in that situation. They took the possessions. They didn't take the man, and if man remains, everything can be rebuilt. The real catastrophe is not dismissal, it is not divorce, it is not bankruptcy. The real catastrophe occurs when you allow the breaking of external things to break the fortress of your mind. Epictetus did not say this to console. He said it because he had tested this idea in the most brutal laboratory possible. An enslaved body, a broken leg, a system that tried by all means to erase his humanity. And he came out the other side not bitter, not destroyed, not empty, but with a clarity that rich, free-born philosophers never achieved. This is not self-help. This is a survival strategy for people who live in worlds where rules change without warning, where loyalty is not rewarded, where effort does not guarantee results. The question is not whether the world will be unfair to you. Go. The question is, what you do with the only thing that remains yours. Your answer. Epictetus. Crutch was not a symbol of pity. It was the trophy of the man who looked at the worst in human nature and didn't blink. They broke the bone. They didn't break the man. Life will put your leg in the press. Sooner or later, the crank will turn. Your only responsibility, when the bone cracks, is to keep your eyes open and your soul sovereign. If you've made it this far, sign up. The next video will tell the story of the man who ruled the largest empire in history while writing, every night, that was nothing more than dust, and how this paradox was the secret of everything he achieved.